Welcome to Narcofeminism and Women Who Use Drugs, Changing the Narrative. We are so excited to be here with you today. We are going to begin by going through some announcements relevant to your participation in an HIV 2020 online session. So you will please choose the audio channel for the language of your choice by selecting interpretation and then the language. Press mute original audio to only hear the interpreter. HIV 2020 online sessions offer a safe and neutral space for sharing of knowledge, experience, skills, and opinions in a mutually respectful manner. HIV 2020 Online operates on a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of bullying, harassment, abusive use of language, aggressive expression of opinions, or any such undesirable behaviors. This includes any activity during the Zoom session or on HIV 2020 online sessions or on HIV 2020 online social media platforms, whether that be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, that may cause distress to panelists, speakers, translators, and or participants. Session participants who engage in such actions will be immediately removed from the session with no prior notice. And we'll begin. We are going to begin with the Narcofeminism Story Share leaders sharing our stories. I will introduce narcofeminism very quickly by saying that I am sure that you have heard drug users on TV, in the media, saying things like, I'm so glad that I went to jail, it saved my life, I had to hit bottom and almost die in order to be okay, I'm glad they took my kids, they were safer away from me. The stories that we want to tell, the stories that are not inundated with 12-step tropes, we never get to hear them. So here are some of these stories today. And I will begin with my story. I'll be reading some warnings for it, and then I'm going to go right into it. One moment. So I'd just like to warn for gore and blood, graphic depictions of injection, and general references to domestic violence. He hit a nerve, an electric shock of pain squalling down the meat of my thumb, and I screamed, full-throated, loud enough so that we both jumped, with the syringe still skewered into the side of my hand. Don't do that, John snapped. John, usually so soft-spoken and measured. I thought I was killing you. I used to try to be stoic. It's hard to be stoic enough to keep pace with your much older, 2.5 tour, heavy combat, Vietnam vet, butch Marine criminal boyfriend. But I did my best. I felt like it was the least I could do when I couldn't even get myself off. Me, Katie, the feminist harm reductionist, who could sing the praises of autonomy all day long, but whose shitty hand-eye coordination left her dependent on a man to inject her, just like the most wretched, junky domestic abuse victim. Not that what John and I had was anything like the water shots and lies I saw dope fiends dole out to their poor, needy, skinny wives at the SRO, the single-room occupancy John and I met in years and years ago. John and I might be worlds different. Me, the 29-year-old activist / escort / writer / dilettante, the pretentious Seven Sisters dropout, and him, the steady 62-year-old dealer born in a New York City neighborhood you only got out of in a uniform or a box. But we worked. He was my street mentor, my running partner, my lover of 7 years and counting. He'd get me off first while he was still sick. He'd hold my arm gently in his big, rough, arthritic palm while he bent over me, scrutinizing the needle's movements studiously. That ritual junkie couples sung paeans to, which seemed like bullshit when it was about anyone else. That intimacy when he injected me, gifting me with that pleasure, more solid than any sexual connection. That all seemed so real between us. So it was the least I could do to be stoic for him. But I wasn't fucking trying to be stoic anymore right now. The sodden smell of blood filled our bathroom as the hot sun hit the tiles and the wooden counter. We'd been at this for at least a half an hour. I felt like his human pincushion, bleeding from half a dozen different places on my swollen hands. The amazing veinless woman, I used to joke with him bitterly, except that the dripping of dark purplish venous blood from 6 different open wounds made a mockery of that. I had veins, all right, and blood to flow through them. They just wouldn't cooperate with him and draw a flag to surge through the syringe. Time and time again, I'd jerk a bit in my seat, following his needle's progress with my eyes, thinking we'd finally gotten it. But no, it was the movement of an air bubble, or the plunger, or the blood already in the barrel, which had seeped in throughout this ordeal, threatening to coagulate the entire bundle of dope in the solution at any moment. Motherfucker, I kept murmuring under my breath. I wasn't sick. I'd been on the clinic for a couple of years at this point. But God, the sheer frustration, this little death by 1,000 fucking cuts had to be worth something, had to earn me the payoff of an actual hit. Tying off one arm and then the next, shaking off the pins and needles in one constricted arm and then the next, tying it too loose so then he'd have to retie it for me because I couldn't even do that right. Just try it, I kept shrieking at him every time I caught sight of what was ultimately a false flag. You're not going to be happy if I do, he kept replying, more and more frustrated now himself. Finally, I saw my own hand in the corner of my eye. It was the hand that wasn't currently pinned down to the bathroom counter, stuck with a needle that felt torturously dull now. I saw my hand raised. I saw my hand raised, as if to hit him. I was shocked silent, lowering that offending hand awkwardly. I think maybe he pretended not to notice. I don't remember, but maybe I apologized. I'm pretty sure I wasn't good enough to walk away. I'm pretty sure I sat there until he finally did coax a hit out of my veins, till he finally did inject me, whether he ended up missing some or not. But I stopped doing dope for a year the very next day. It was a miserable, depressive year, full of silent days in which I only left the house to go to the clinic. But I did stop. I never thought, in all of this fucked up dependency, that it was me I had to be afraid of this whole time. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Jess's story.
Hello, I'm Jess Tilley. I'm going to read this story. I'm sitting in the living room of my parents' house, which is not my childhood home. I've never lived here and I never will, but right now it represents safety. I'm sitting just outside my mom's peripheral vision, and I'm painfully aware she's doing all she can to not shift her gaze directly on me. We're once again conducting the miserable dance routine, one we started to choreograph once she found out I was using heroin. Sidestep once, turn away, step back, move towards one another, and sidestep again, repeat. I'm so tired, and my scuffed Doc Martens went off this dance floor permanently. I'm in a surreal state, my body slack, but my mind heightened as I pretend to watch a made-for-TV miniseries about the 70s. It's a little after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. At 6 p.m. today, I was pronounced dead in the back of an ambulance, only to resume breathing seconds later. I was told this as I came to in a local hospital. I remember my last conscious thought upon leaving a filthy Burger King bathroom in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. how white the lines of the crosswalk were as I trundled across the street. Then nothing. Blackness. Then suddenly, pure panic. 3-point restraints and my own desperate pleas to leave the emergency room. Thankfully, I was in one of the rare periods where I just on the brink of giving myself a physical habit. I wasn't quite there yet, so I was spared the hellish payback naloxone demands when gifting one's life back into one's body. But I'd still come out of the reversal swinging, hence in restraints. My Smith College ID convinced the staff to let me leave. As I stood outside the ER entrance, only one thought repeated itself incessantly. I want to go home. I want to go home. I did not mean my home, but my parents' home. The prodigal daughter returns once more and sits in silence, unable to relate the past few hours' events out of fear and shame of admitting to myself that something is critically wrong with my life right now. It's even harder to admit that I just died. My eyes, when I can stand to open them, continuously dart around the living room. The naloxone begins to wear off, and the heroin is settling into my opiate receptors once again. Two things keep pulling me out of the nod that threatens to take over. First, the little circular metal buttons still stuck to my chest that were used to monitor my heartbeat, 6 in total, placed on me as my life slowly ebbed away. I keep running my fingers over them as a reminder of what just happened and to force myself into wakefulness. The second is a set of bronze baby shoes that serve as a base for a picture of my 2-year-old self. I know they are meant to be a keepsake of childhood, yet for me right now, they seem more like a memorial to a child lost. I cannot look away from them. My mother is watching me now. I can't turn to look back at her. The thought comes again. I just want to go home, but I've forgotten how to get there. Good night, Jesse, my mom says quietly from behind me as she heads off to bed. You're welcome to spend the night. Instead, I leave after another hour of fighting to stay conscious as the drugs finally begin to wear off. As I head out the door, I turn around and jot quickly, I'm sorry, on a small piece of paper, and I tuck it into one of the bronze baby shoes as I go. And I'm going to hand it over to Louise now.
Okay. Hello. All right, I'm going to get started. Louise, wake up. He's done it again. What? What are you talking about, I ask. You see, part of my PTSD is being easily triggered by waking up in an emergency, often waking up to abuse, yelling, screaming, and violence has made it so I'm very confused when I wake. I remember not knowing where I was at that moment or what was happening. I remember the blank confusion in my brain as my partner's voice screamed, Louise, I need you now. I sat up abruptly, shaking my head, my eyes barely coming into focus. Get out here, Don begged. I could hear the urgency, the fear. I knew there was no question. Wiggs must have overdosed again. I knew the only thing that could make my man scream in panic was the sight of a dead person on our living room floor. I went to jump off the bed, remembering I only have one leg, only a moment later. So I hopped over to the door, balancing myself as steadily as possible. I made my way all the way out to the living room, desperately trying to get there without falling. There he was, my friend, my dear best friend, whom I'd revived from overdose so many times, his face completely white. My partner leaned over him, giving him the oxygen he so desperately needed. In that moment, I did not feel love or compassion. I felt rage. I skipped over to him as fast as I could. I couldn't remember the last time I felt this furious. I was so goddamn mad. My partner looked relieved when I was finally at my friend's side. I looked at Adam, his cold, white, lifeless face, his blue lips. I could see his bone structure so clearly in that thin face. Oh, how I hated him. I felt fury in my heart. My hand reared back and I slapped him as hard as a person could. His slack flesh moved just as if I'd hit a dead person. It felt good, though. It felt really fucking good. How could he do this to me again? I thought. This after a year of daily overdose reversals and throwing him out of my house because I simply could not watch the inevitable happen. He was not the same man I ran the roads with, delivering syringes and naloxone and performing overdose reversals on others. Adam Wiggs, as I called him, had been my harm reduction partner and friend for the last 15 years. Never did I think our relationship would be strained by overdose. He was the one who taught me how to stay calm in the face of trauma and urgency. He was always so strong and even-minded. We taped an overdose and aired it on CNN with Sanjay Gupta to help change the laws around naloxone. We fought together for Good Samaritan laws, and now I was accusing him of carelessness. Now I could not help but wonder if he pushed the boundaries because I was there to revive him. This was someone who in my mind was already dead. I grieved his loss after every overdose. This was the trauma of watching your loved one die every day, over and over, with only you standing in between their life and their death. God damn it. Could he not figure out how much dope to do? Hell, I told him I couldn't even do dope with him anymore. Adam knew I did not want him using around me. It had become our regular fight. He knew better than anyone how the police longed to put me in jail. They would surely charge me for his death. I wanted to be there for him, but this was a real fear of mine. My arm swung back again to hit Wiggs. This time, a hand grabbed my wrist, and my partner's scared eyes caught mine. What are you doing? Bring him back first. I shook my head as if the confusion was still complicating my thinking. Oh my God, what was I doing? I slowed down, began to breathe the necessary air into my friend. Finally, the panic went through my heart. What if he died? What if he didn't come back this time? Fuck. I remember thinking. How did he get any drugs? How has this happened? Not again. I hated him because I knew what this meant. I hated him because the Adam I knew was gone to me. I had closed myself off to him. I knew Adam would die like my daughter, like all the other people I knew who had died. It was simply a matter of time. It was easier to blame him than all of the shit I didn't truly understand. It was easier to tell myself he did not care about life than to face the god-awful truth that we had so little control over this new fentanyl-contaminated world. I knew that one day I would not be there to bring him back. I knew one day this would be the end of my dear friend Adam. The truth is we don't have a chance. None of us do. We're doomed because of a poison drug supply and the deadly stigma which keeps us terrified of the hospital, unable to seek medical assistance. My anger, the pain, the hate I felt slapping Wiggs, it belongs to our policies, our drug war, our situation, not my dear friend. I brought him back that day and a few times after that. Our relationship became more strained than ever. We retained only the shell of a friendship that had once been. Was it the drugs? Was it the drug war? Our love lacked the oxygen it needed to live. I was unable to see that none of his actions were about me. They were about him. We too often think people are using at us, dying at us, but they are simply surviving the best they can. Yes, Wiggs is dead, no longer here to laugh with me or cry with me. We loved each other through pain I cannot revisit. He loved me as my life changed. He loved me when I longed for death and could not see a way through. Some people would hear this story and say drugs stole Adam's life. They would be mad at heroin. The fact is that drug policy stole Adam's life. Hospital policy, which left him to die of endocarditis, alone, with no family or friends present in the room because he was a known injection drug user. I miss my friend. Life is less beautiful without him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to take a few moments, each of us, to unpack our stories. One of the main thrusts of the Narcofeminism Project is that our stories are about disrupting narratives, stereotypes, and tropes about drug-using women and non-men. But one thing we discovered while doing this work is that often it takes further unpacking. The stories themselves just cannot do justice to our feelings and to our true intentions, simply because we are so inundated by media telling the opposite stories. So we've realized that we needed more framing and unpacking for our audiences. So we're each going to say a few words about our stories to begin. One moment.
Do you two want to jump on camera?
Yes, sorry. Am I sharing the slides correctly?
You've got Katie's story, warnings for blood, gore, grief,
Yes.
general reference to domestic.
That's what I want on there. Thank you.
Jess, why don't you get on camera?
I can't. The host has me.
Okay, all right.
Oh, no, I'm
Yeah.
I'm on camera now. Thank you. Just had to figure out how to do that while doing the slide share. I apologize for our technical difficulties.
Yes, sorry.
Moment. All right. So we often use my story as an icebreaker, especially when we're doing the narcofeminism model with a new group of people. My story is an instant icebreaker. It creates instant identification and relation. People people find it very easy to relate to, and I think I think drug using women are even hungry to relate to it. There's so much said about the need for representation of marginalized groups within the media, the need for marginalized groups to have someone to identify with, and yet drug using women have practically nobody to identify with in media representations. The media representations of us are of 12-step tropes, not of us as nuanced, fully dimensional people. Even when I read just a 5-minute sketch of some of these issues, of the incredible difficulty that women have injecting, of how we are often initiated into injection by men, and how dependent we are often on men to inject us, and the intimacy between two lovers when one of them injects the other, that often so many drug-using couples describe as transcending sex. All of those things are not things that we ever see in the media about ourselves. And we're so desperate for it. We're so desperate for some representation of our actual lives. And I think the last thing that my story does to disrupt traditional narratives around drug-using women is that even among harm reduction savvy crowds, when we think about injection dependence on men, we think about a power dynamic that only goes one way. We think about we think about power imbalance and abuse, and yet abuse can be much more nuanced than that, and power dynamics can be much more liminal. It's at the end of the story, I was the one who veered into abusive behavior, even though I was the one who was materially dependent on John to inject me. But because he was so willing and so devoted to me, so eager to take care of me, he was vulnerable to abuse at my hands. And I think it's important to complicate narratives of abuse and talk about just how complex they are. With that, I am going to hand it off to Jess to discuss her story.
Hi, I do want to point out before I share the reason Louise and I chose our stories to be our overdose stories is because here in the United States, COVID-19 has set us so far back. Everything we had gained in reference to overdose deaths and really lowering the death rate has just gone completely sideways. And once again, drug users' voices, drug users' lives, rights are just to the wayside. So we thought it was very important that we choose the stories that we've written, and we've written a plethora of stories that actually depicted overdose. My story is especially relevant to me. My mother is quite often a theme in my stories because what this doesn't share the backstory, but my mother and I are very close. That's not pointed out in the story. You don't see that in the story because I wanted it to highlight, we're fed in the media that tough love is the only thing that works. And my mother did not practice tough love. And I'm so thankful. And for that reason, I'm still alive. However, at this point in the story, she didn't know what to do. So avoidance was what was offered to me. We don't hear about that in the media. And, and for me, it was important because at that age, at the age I wrote that I was in the story at 23, I was already a well-known drug user activist nationally. Yet the amount of internalized stigma that runs through that story is something we also don't hear about in the media. The drug war had absolutely, at the age of 23, had already beaten me down so far that I was embarrassed to talk about the fact that I used drugs. And that was the theme that was so relevant to me in that story is I had just died. And yet I couldn't tell the person closest to me in my life what I had just experienced because the drug war told me I was a junkie. And this is a theme I would often struggle with until present, actually. So, many parents have heard this story and it's opened up a world of dialogue for them. I've shared it with participants and participants' parents, and it's allowed them to talk to their children. And, that's what this project has been for me, especially so important, is that it's changed that dialogue that, tough love is the only way, that, the child who's using drugs will step over their dying grandmother to get their next fix. I mean, I think it illustrates perfectly the love that is between mother and child, even in the midst of chaotic drug use. And I'm going to hand it over to Louise. I'm trying to keep it short here.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. This is a project that I love. And thank you, Jess, for talking about, overdose and why we read the overdose stories. Absolutely. We have had so many people die in the United States, and this fentanyl contaminated, drug poisoned, environment that makes it so impossible to stay safe. And that's what I'm reading about in this story. What I'm reading about in this story is someone I love, and I knew how to take care of themselves, and found myself playing those narratives that we hear. Oh, they're just pushing boundaries. Naloxone is just another way that people don't take care of themselves, right? We heard about naloxone parties, right? We heard about if we give them naloxone, then they'll just get even higher. And here I know that not to be true. But yet my friend who was continuously overdosing, I found myself asking these questions and making these accusations, and very angry with. And what this is all about is this misplaced aggression, right? I say it in the story that this This aggression doesn't belong with my friend. This anger doesn't belong to my friend. This anger belongs to policy, which doesn't allow us to take care of ourselves, which doesn't even allow us to be on methadone in the United States without tremendous barriers. We don't even have the beginnings of solutions in the United States uh, for our drug crisis. We are not looking at scientific solutions. We are not looking at ways that things can be done to reduce harm to people that use drugs. I mean, we in 2016 was when syringe service programs became legal in North Carolina. So, I mean, most people had syringe. We certainly had the evidence in that syringe service programs worked well before 2016, right? So, I think there's a lot to be said about the anger that people feel toward people that use drugs, right? A lot of times that anger is misplaced. A lot of times that it's because we are not given the tools. Society does not give us the tools to take care of one another and to love one another. And so all we can do is remove ourselves or isolate or try to be or become cold because we fear the old, what's going to happen. In this case, I knew my friend would die, and he did. And trying to reduce the pain of that loss and feeling that over and over and over again. One of the ways I coped was to become very angry and cold and to disassociate. And I see parents do this with children. I see this happening with friends. And then I talk about in this story drug-induced homicide laws, where I'm not thinking about my friend dying. I'm thinking about my going to prison if he does die, and how that gets in the way of our even being able to take care of one another. In the midst of fearing someone you love is going to die, all of a sudden saying, oh, wait a minute, I can't think about that. I might go to jail. This is a real mess. And so policy rings through the story that I'm telling, and just all of the different ways that we are not allowed to love and take care of one another the way we should. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I also wanted to add the core of the project, I believe, is these stories, the tough love stories, the 12-step stories, the totally apolitical stories without structural analysis, the self-blaming stories. We have to tell these stories in order to survive. We have to tell these stories to our probation officers, to our methadone clinic counselors, to our families, to our non-drug using friends. We have to tell these stories if we want to get out of jail, if we want to get through, if we want to, obtain resources from a world that is just infested with stigma against drug users, right? And so then we eventually we can't help but to internalize them. I mean, I wanted to add one more thing about my story, which is that you see my own biases against other drug users in that story. You see my own classism around drug use. Because from my perspective in my mid-20s, sure, I was a drug user, but I wasn't like the rest of them. I wasn't going to put myself in a position where I was, dependent and vulnerable. And yet there I was in that very same position. I was judging people who was living in the same single room occupancy housing that I did, and I was thinking, I pitied them, but I thought of them as weak. You hear my references to skinny dope fiend wives, right? So a large part of this project was us just trying to unpack the ways, even as very conscious drug user activists who fought against these sorts of prejudices and biases every day of our working lives, the extent to which we had all internalized this. And I was crying somewhat hearing Louise cry, telling her story again. I think after working on these stories for so long and polishing and refining them, it's hard to remember just the sheer emotional impact that they have when read to an audience. But I had written a similar story about my ex-girlfriend's overdose death. And the first draft of the story that I'd read to our storytelling group, it was just, they asked me, how does this disrupt the narrative? Because I presented myself as very cold. You know, I was the cold, numb, unfeeling drug user who didn't care. And as I started to tell the group more about the context of what had happened, why, why I had started feeling detached from my ex-girlfriend, why I felt so numb at her death, it was just like it was in Louise's story. It was because I was not given the tools by the world to take care of her, and yet I was the only person who could have, because every other part of the world was inimical to her. Every other part of the world was inimical to drug users, hostile to us, and ready to destroy us. So I had to be everything to her. I had to fulfill every role of, mother, counselor, babysitter, harm reduction counselor, etc. And I just couldn't do that. So and so in order to save myself, I detached myself from her completely. I wasn't cold. I was overwhelmed. I was devastated. And so that gets us into how we use culture projects like this one as organizing and health tools. We've been able to use this narcofeminism story sharing model in so many subject areas with so many different groups of drug users. We've used it in our project around methadone advocacy. We've used it in the North Carolina Survivors Union with a group of women around Hep C access and activism. We've used it. With now, we're doing a new reproductive justice module around drug using parents and pregnant people. And every single time, these stories are just so important and so vital. I sometimes hear from people that culture projects are not as important as other advocacy and activism, because somehow they just aren't as, they aren't as integral to shaping our material reality. We should all be doing policy and legislative work. They're not material and substantive like direct service. So what is the point of culture projects? Well, the point of culture projects is, as Louise always says, a story is so much more powerful than a statistic. And these stories affect both us, us and our drug using peers, our own community, and our audiences so much more than even our most persuasive arguments, even all of the incredible data that we have for our positions ever could. And I'm going to turn it over to Jess or Louise now, because I've been talking for a while.
Louise, you want to go, or I can go really quick? I know we're running short on time.
Why don't you go real quick and I'll go next?
Okay. I do want to say one of the things that's been so important during this project, and we should say we've been working on this project for a couple of years now, working with different groups of women and helping them find their voice. Again, as women who use drugs, we have just been fed every negative stereotype we could believe about ourselves. And I know that's why I already said it after I read my story, but when I point out to others that even as myself, as an internationally recognized drug user activist, if at the end of the day I still see a junkie in the mirror, how are women who are in the middle of the United States, who have no outlet to tell their story, how are they thinking about themselves? And that's why this is so important to me. Back in February, we did a group with a bunch of women down in North Carolina, and to watch women reclaim their voice, a voice that so many of them had never had. And the project was around hepatitis C, women who had Hep C, and Louise had brought a bunch of women together. It was like watching somebody be reborn, watching them claim their voice for the first time and not feel shame. We only hope that the women can carry this out into the world after the storytelling. And that's why it's so important for us when we do these projects, not to just walk away, to continue to keep in touch with the women, and that there is no like fly in, fly out, sort of voyeuristic mentality to the storytelling projects we do. And I think that's where we've differed from any storytelling project I've ever seen. Louise, I'm going to turn it over to you just because I know we're very short on time.
Right. Well, I just want to highlight, thank you both. I think you both have said so much about what we've done with narcofeminism story sharing. And I've had the privilege of being involved in this from the beginning and really watching the different the different ways we've tried to go about this, and what ultimately has shown itself to work, and some of the lessons learned. We brought in storytellers in the beginning, and we watched ourselves as we turned over power. It was really one of the biggest lessons learned is that we are the experts, right? But we so often um, question ourselves and don't believe in ourselves so much that the minute somebody seemingly responsible comes to the table, we're quick to just we hand over all our power and then wonder what happened. And so we've watched as these things have sort of played themselves out and played themselves through. Um, we have really um, been, I just have to highlight with the Women's Story Sharing Project that we brought in for hepatitis C. One of the big pieces that stands out to me is there was a woman in the group who tells her story, and she talks about it's her fault that her daughter has hep C. It's her fault her boyfriend has hep C. It's her fault. I mean, good God, you let her tell it. It's her fault the whole state has hep C. And by the time we worked through this story, right, she's beginning to see some of the structural factors at play. Oh, wait a minute. There was no syringe service program available to me until 2 years ago. Oh, wait a minute. The government long knew that this worked. So watching people come to this is really amazing. If we are left, we call on drug users to sit on advisory boards. We call on drug users to do these things. If they've not done the work necessary to really understand what's going on with drug policy, what's going on with an abstinence-based paradigm, what's going on, then what happens is we internalize all of this negativity and then we spit it back out. And we tell stories and we are not able to make the kinds of decisions that we need to make that really build up the power of people that use drugs. And to be quite honest, I think that some of these groups count on that. And they bring one drug user in that hasn't done the work, and then we can't do the amazing things that are possible once you do the structural work and you understand that you're not responsible as an individual for everything in the world, that the social determinants of health, that all of these pieces of our lives impact our ability to care for ourselves and others. And I only know what narcofeminism story share has done in my life, and that has brought me closer to the women that I work with in ways that I could not have dreamed. We all had to go through, we've gone through all sorts of dynamics doing this project, but what has resulted is intimacy, love, and I think those are things that you often don't find. Women find so many reasons to be at opposite sides of one another and find so many reasons to be competitive in all of these places. And what this project has done is really tear down some of the walls that we build up, and we that we have there because we're afraid, and the trauma we've experienced in our lives that keeps us from getting close to one another. This project has allowed me to become close to both Katie and Jess in ways that I am deeply grateful for. And I remember the first time Katie told the story that she told today, and I just remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, it's like there it is! Like no one has ever told my story that way." And it's not all full of media where we're in some seedy alley. It's just a story. It's just sitting in a living room doing what we do. And how powerful is that? We find our humanity through story sharing, and I'm grateful to be part of this project. Thanks.
Before we hand it over, we want to acknowledge that there is a question and answer. People could put their questions into the chat box. We will be answering them afterwards, I believe. Right, we're answering questions at the end. We do have 3 questions so far, but please put them in.
Yeah, actually, we're running a bit ahead of time. I wanted to add to what Louise said about growing closer to people. When I first walked into that group of women that we did the story sharing model with, the Beyond Tested Cured group for women, for drug using women with Hep C, I asked Louise, how long has this group been meeting? Because the intimacy between them, the way that they were able to nurture each other and comfort each other, I thought this group of women had known each other for years. And she told me that some of them had only met for the past 3 or 4 other meetings that they'd had for the project before. And that is the extent to which storytelling can build intimacy between us. And I wanted to say that drug users are natural storytellers in raconteurs. I mean, we are able, if you're just in a room, and as Louise was saying, just in a living room, doing what we do, in a room of drug users fixing up, right? You hear the most amazing stories, you hear the rawest stories, you hear the most incredible stories. We often exchange stories between each other. That's just a natural, like, folk form of our culture. And yet these stories, these incredible stories that we just tell behind closed doors to each other, never see the light. And I wanted to make a subtler point too, as well, about just the stories that we tell as drug user activists to make political points. I have often related to my own biography as just, a paper that I could comb through to cite evidence, right? I look for the stories that can prove a structural point, and that I can politicize quickly. And they're stripped of meaning and feeling for me after a while, because I've told these stories so often, it's as if it happened to somebody else. And they're not nuanced stories either, right? Because they're just about proving a specific political point. And so I think what this project really did for me, and I think for a lot of other drug user activists, is it brought us back to the feeling in our life stories. It brought us back to the complexity, the complications, the things that, that can't be summarized in a quick political gloss. And those are important too. We really don't get to reflect on our lives like that, because we're so invested in, just trying to debunk the myths and lies about us. We don't get time to reflect like that.
Well, and I just
Yeah, go on,
If I
sorry.
could just say, we've used this story sharing project for 2 legislative pieces as well. So we've had to fight death by distribution, which is a drug-induced homicide law, and we've fought House Bill 918, which is a reproductive justice. They were taking children away from parents earlier if they were born with drugs in their system, and one of the very powerful pieces about this is we were able to talk about these issues in ways that people could empathize and see us as human. And this is so important. And so I think the more we do this and the more we're able to bring stories into policy and into the world that is so full of facts and statistics. We're not going to change anybody's mind with facts and statistics. In fact, in the United States, I'm afraid they don't even believe in facts and statistics on any given day, and so it's really tough. The only thing we have left is to really bring people in to empathy, and to feel these stories with us and to walk through these stories with us. And so we're very excited about our next steps with this project, which is a new reproductive justice arm of the project. And we are so excited about what's coming next. So stay tuned.
And I would like to point out what you're seeing right now is, 3 white women with a pretty much a excessive amount of privilege, as we've been able to even deconstruct in the storytelling. What this, and unfortunately, Diana Ortiz couldn't join us today, but her story really, I'd like to just point out, we weren't able to share a story, but how it illustrated how a woman of color is treated in the healthcare system. As there's an extra layer for so many of the women who are involved in our story project, who are women of color, who are experiencing such shame and stigma to being able to, they don't even have the right, I'd say, to identify as a drug user. And through storytelling, it's given a lot of women their voices back and been able to really allow us, in the harm reduction movement, race and class are not discussed. And I truly believe, as Louise just said, the next chapter of narco-feminism is going to allow us to start addressing these really intense topics that need to be talked about in the harm reduction movement if we expect to move forward.
And I will just end by saying that these are these are definitely stories that we never hear. If we never hear the stories of relatively privileged, very privileged, in fact, drug users like us, we certainly don't hear stories like the one I'm currently editing with a brilliant Black activist from the inner city right now about organized gangs in her city that exist just to prey on drug-using sex workers. That is their only hustle. We don't hear about people navigating experiences like that except in lurid news stories, right? And we don't hear about stories like the one that I'm working on with my other contractor about having to give birth on a street corner and nearly dying because she required a C-section and the police were too slow to respond to her. And, you know, when we do hear stories like that, it's summarized and it sounds so sensationalized, and even just, you know, like saying it briefly like that. And we need the format of the autobiographical story, the person's actual perspective, to truly be able to give those stories justice. And yes, so if Ara, if you would like to take over now.
Thank you guys so much for allowing us to share in this space and share our stories. And if anybody would like to find out more about narcofeminism, StoryShare, they can contact Katie, Jessica, or myself, and we would be glad to help bring narcofeminism StoryShare to your project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think that is first Priscilla, maybe? Priscilla is coming from...
Right,
From
Priscilla
Brazil.
next, yeah.
Hola Priscila, ¿qué tal esta tarde?
I'm okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, I would like to thank all of the previous participants for sharing their stories, because in our network, the anti-prohibitionist feminist network is based on sharing the stories of women who are also very much involved with their families. Families are central to our project. My name is Priscila Gadelia. I am from Pernambuco in northeastern Brazil. And a young Black man is killed in my region every 17 minutes. So there is a war going on, which is called the war on drugs, but it's actually a war on Black people and poor people. My organization is called the REINFA, and we are coming from different places, but I think that first and foremost it was very nice to hear your experience in the previous panel. We always talk about self-care. Self-care is one of our pillars. When we started working, we realized that we were all suffering quite a lot. Once we took on the role of drug users, we started suffering, and we wanted female drug users to acknowledge themselves as such, because first it was all based on men. White men were in charge of the movement. Academics was also very important, so they always spoke from an academic perspective. But in Brazil, the reality and the experience of women and their families and the vast amount of complexities that are involved in the policies are very important. I'm also in harm reduction. That's what I've been doing for a while. And in our movement, in our network, we took many different ideas, perspectives, and formats to build the REINFA, which is a feminist, anti-racist, apolitical network that was created in 2014 and founded in 2016. And afterwards, we started working on drug policy. But throughout history, women have remained invisible, and we basically just start working without realizing that we don't have a voice. And this was when we actually came together and we gave a voice to women. So in our network, we have female drug users, women who have been judged by the system. Many of them have also been in jail, and they have been victims victims of this system, and they have been living in the street. We have sex workers, and we must remember that we are an anti-prohibitionist network that also welcomes trans community members. And of course, they are not discriminated based on gender, race, or social class. So RAINFA, my network, is building a debate where gender, race, and class need to be considered, because it is not relevant to talk about any of these issues if we don't criticize racism and capitalism. That's where we're coming from. And we also work based on Black feminism. We knew that many of the aspects that were being prioritized in politics didn't make sense. So talking about structural racism in the most racist country in the world, which is Brazil, we needed to ground our project. So we started doing things in a respectful way, but we also needed to shed light on ethnic diversity, and we had to take bias away from the equation. We defend self-determination for all of the peoples in Brazil, and we want to ensure that jail is the last option. We are also abolitionists because we cannot believe in a system where the only way to think about prevention strategies, care strategies, is through penalties or through jail sentences. We need to find other formats to make justice, because the only thing that this achieves is the increase in oppression, and it only makes punishment harder and harder on the vulnerable communities and vulnerable populations such as women, poor people, and Black people. We defend the rights of all people in our community, and we also believe in reproductive self-determination. We want to empower women and their bodies. You have to decide what you want to do with your body. We also condemn commercialization of our bodies and our sexualities. There is a lot of human trafficking, female trafficking, children trafficking in Brazil. We have programs for women who live in the streets, and we have been advocating in all of the spaces that we are working right now. We have partners in other networks because it's important to understand that it's not just us. We need to broaden our vision. Brazil is a continental country, let's say, so there is a great variety of issues that take place here, and there's also a very big cultural variety. And as drug users, we have a very specific need to participate in power discussions, in places where people with power are discussing the future of our society. So drug users need to participate in policy making, and we need to call people who are usually the most privileged people to actually acknowledge themselves as drug users. But we're not only drug users, we're coming from different places and we have different characteristics. We need to get rid of stigma, and we need to take our political power, we need to share our stories, and we need to think about alternatives to this imposed system. We also talk about different perspectives that promote care for people who use drugs, and we are always based on harm reduction policy. And the SUS system, SUS system in Brazil, is the universal health care system in Brazil. It's, actually not just like the universal healthcare system, but it's public, it's available for everyone, and our government right now is a real issue because they want to get rid of this healthcare system that is public, it's free, and it is provided to everyone who needs it. So that is one of our struggles right now, which is against the government that is in place. women drug users also need to defend themselves against oppression, and we need to fight for transforming society. Leila, which is one of our colleagues, said that our network is looking for a new framework because this project is not catering to everyone's needs. Just a while ago, women were not even considered human beings, so much less women drug users. We are very far away from that human definition that exists out there. So what kind of humanity is this? Now we need a new framework for our whole civilization in order for us to be acknowledged as humans. And maybe if humanity is not the word that we need to use, maybe we need to come up with new words, new concepts, new definitions. And so REINFA is committed to solidarity, to building solidarity projects with all of the victims of the war on drugs. So we have been advocating in many different territories and communities that have been directly affected by war. And as I said, politics in Brazil mean that people are not dying from using drugs, they are dying from violence fostered by the war on drugs, the use of lethal weapons and blunt weapons, as they call it here. They need not be fire weapons, they can be any kind of weapons that are used in the streets. And it's not about the use of drugs, it's about drug trafficking, it's about territorial struggles, the police, the way that the police does what it does. And the president's airplane was found with 39 kilos of cocaine alongside a representative of the Brazilian army. So that was detected in Spain. That was something that they found it in Spain, but it's an absurd government that we have in place right now. So this was just neglected and nothing was done about it. And right now, the Brazilian government is looking to change drug policy, and they want to get rid of harm reduction as a practice for political activism. So us harm reducers in Brazil, we will not end because we exist. We will not be destroyed. And that is why REINFA understand that there is a need for us to create a larger movement. Right now, we have a presence in 11 states in Brazil, and we have little groups of women that work in all of these states: Alagoas, Pernambuco, Bahia, Ceará, Brasília, Goiás, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Minas Gerais. And we keep growing because all of this needs to be developed as a country. So we also have a Latin American cooperation. We met with other groups with female drug users in all of Latin America: Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. And our goal was to come up with a new drug policy model for our continent. We understand that we have a different reality in comparison to Europe and other continents, but here the main difference is that this is a bloody war. So we are constantly fighting for drugs' place in society. And so on a daily basis, young people are killed. Here in Recife, for instance, today, a 17-year-old was assassinated. Well, he was killed by the police, and the police shot him in the head. So that's something that's very common, but people will just say, oh yeah, he was involved with drugs, so that's okay, and it's widely accepted by society. So we need to come together to get organized in a way that we can create a national force, but also a continental force. Because the people who are actually suffering the consequences of war are here, and it's absurd that we're getting used to the fact that friends and family are dying on a daily basis. So we have split up into working groups and action groups. This was a transition that was done on a daily basis, and it's not imposed on anyone. It's Rainfell, we work with volunteers, and when people are able and willing to do this, we assign several different projects to do financing or trying to find financial resources to keep fighting. And we need to seek out those resources, because having more financial resources would mean better advocacy efforts, but we also need to support women who have been affected by this war model. There is a state in Brazil that's called Bahia, and the women in Bahia, they were on the streets. There was a group of women who lived on the streets, and they had continuous needs for food, of course, logistics, clothes, and we needed more resources because they needed them to survive. So we understood that we needed to work more with people in the streets. So in our working groups, we have several strategies that have been put in place, and we need to try to put drug users at the forefront, as well as trans people, people who live in the streets, sex workers, and all of this needs to have a foundation, and we need to have a support network for them, because sometimes when they speak out, they will be attacked, and we need to be able to provide those spaces for them. There is such a great level of oppression that self-esteem is harmed, and people are driven away. They want to isolate themselves. So until we have this place at the forefront, we need to have a very strong network that's backing up our spokespeople. So we need to provide support to all of the people in our network until we have a safe space. And we are looking to legalize all drugs, because, well, in Brazil there was a very favorable scenario for legalization in the previous government, but now it is no longer the case. So there were many different spaces. We wanted to legalize cannabis, but then they asked, "Oh, do you want to legalize crack as well?" That was a question from the government. And we said, "No, we want to legalize coke in general. We're not talking about crack." So we need to have a debate that destroys stigma, and that's why it's so complicated. Our political force needs to be very well grounded. My work has been focused on harm reduction. Many of my colleagues also work in harm reduction, and there is a very solid strategy for this. We had this psychiatric reform in Brazil, which was a great achievement in the last few decades, and we continuously work with people because the lack of space in the political sphere is what prevents us from having access to other resources. And of course, we want to promote therapeutic use for certain drugs, and it's not been talked about enough because of the war on drugs. We are always focused on genocide, because Brazil is a country where genocide is constantly taking place. We know that there is a lot of social inequality, so we need to be in the right spaces for political participation, both in civil society and in the government, so that our voices are heard, so that we can speak out about our existence, because we are here. Of course, there are sexual rights and reproductive rights. We carry out our meetings in online platforms right now. These are national meetings, and then for regions, we are also doing online meetings because of the current situation, and we like to do them live as well, because there's always a space for dialogue, for hearing each other out, for hearing our stories, to know what the situation is like in their own territories, in all of the territories in Brazil, because we are all advocating for different things in different states and different regions. So we want to broaden our influence as much as possible. Something else that I would like to point out I think this is the driving force in the organization. There is unity and diversity. This is a principle that we believe in, and this has been an integral part of all of the organizations and all of the groups that make up Rainfa, our network. So the network as a whole needs to follow certain guidelines, but we all are made up of different groups in the country. We need to have horizontal processes that ensure participation and ensure consensus. If we don't reach consensus, then we have a 2/3 majority for decisions within the group, but we always need to hear objections in order to review decisions that have already been made. So no decisions are imposed, it's not set in stone. However, we do want to build consensus, even if it takes a little longer than we had imagined before, and we need to acknowledge that our projects need to be our own. And we believe in dialogue, articulation, and voluntary participation. All of the women who participate in our network are willingly there. Self-care as a political methodology is also very important for us, and it makes a difference, in my opinion, because we are living in a patriarchal society, a racist society, and there is a war on drugs. So we want to promote self-reflection, and we need to foster activism and an anti-prohibitionist fight. Wherever there is a space for discussion about drugs, we will urge women to participate, because we understand that participation in organization and events like the one we're having today are a chance to build narco-feminism, as was mentioned by the previous speakers. We need to create bonds with other feminist groups, feminist movements in several formats, and we understand that we need to participate in all of those spaces to talk about our reality, to talk about our experience, and to really to make it very clear that women are undergoing all of these different circumstances. So we need to have political participation in all of the spaces where we work, and have, influence in March, and a very special day, which is March the 8th, or other events that take place in our continent. Before, it used to be stigma. It used to be something that was just a side note, but now we are a driving force. So for all of the women who want to participate at Renfa, we just believe that it's very important to be very organized and to improve and increase participation in the advocacy efforts in our states. We are here to say that evolution is going to be feminist, anti-prohibitionist, or anti-racist, and otherwise it will not happen. So the Lampood movement, which is also a drug user network, the principle is that nothing needs to be done if we don't participate in the fight or in the decision making. So we are not part of the problem, we are part of the solution. I also wanted to share the screen with you. I don't know if you can see it properly. Are you seeing the slides? These are just photos that I'm putting up here. So this is our network, Renfa. This is a drawing by a colleague from Minas Gerais, and we are introducing ourselves as the National Network for Anti-Prohibitionist Feminists. So this is us. We are diverse. We are completely different from one another, but we have our own space there. We have found ourselves there. This is the first banner that we used for the first national meeting of anti-prohibitionist feminists that took place in Recife on September 3rd to October 1st, 2017. And we wanted to know who we were and what we want. That was our main goal for the meeting. We realized that we wanted to come together and think about our mission, to think about who we are. So it was a very powerful meeting where we talked about our reality, our context, our background. We had women from all over Brazil, and we had buses of people coming in. So Renfa brought Wenca to life. Wenca is this event, which is an event that's taken place many times, and it's allowed us to understand that our project has great potential. This here was one of the campaigns that we launched. It's related to March the 8th. So we created material like this, and all of this material, all of these images are available online on our website. You can print them out, you can put them up wherever you work. We want people to see these messages, and we use open technology, so it's all public. Whatever you want to know about Renfa, you will be able to obtain in our website because it's all available for everyone who is interested. Okay, this photo here is the feminist agenda that is an anti-jail movement. So it was a movement in the state of Ceará and Bahia, and we kept on working on this. So we go to jails, we study the judiciary processes, and we tried to help women who could resort to a legal tool that's called habeas corpus. So we helped them get the habeas corpus. And women in Brazil, if they obtain this, they would be able to maybe stay at home for the duration of their sentence. But in Brazil, this is not a rule. So we wanted to ensure that women had the right to obtain this habeas corpus. So it was very frightening to see all of the sentences that were issued in Brazil, because that's where we can see the patriarchy, the racism, the classism, because then they say that men are a danger to society, but these are only black men. Well, white men are different. White men are people who are doing their jobs and they're trying to do things for society, but for some reason they can't. Here in Brazil, drug traffickers are very dangerous figure, just like, I don't know, terrorists are in the United States. So Renfa is also was also created because of the fight for cannabis. So we believed that we could no longer talk about this when people were going to jail for other reasons. They were being murdered because they were using other drugs. Some of the cannabis users were not sent to jail, but some others were. But what was the difference between them then? Well, cannabis started being socially popular once it started being used for medicinal purposes, but then the social perspective of it started to be different than the opinion about other drugs. Maybe in a few years we can talk about the coke plant medicinal uses, and this is one of the main problems in Latin America. So we can't talk about cannabis alone. I think we need to encompass all of the different drugs, and that's when we understood that we needed to use that narrative to make this a national movement. Okay, this is another campaign that we did. This is also an anti-jail campaign. We are carrying out this campaign. Here, there's a logic where people are sent to jail very easily. Just so you know, during the pandemic, there have been many interventions. There is a place, well, a territory in Brazil that's called the Cannabis Polygon in Brazil, where people are constantly being sent to jail because they are users or distributors of cannabis. And well, in Brazil, we always say that all justice is racist because this region in Brazil is very evidently racist. This week, there was a judge that said that a person was going to jail because of their race, and this is totally absurd. So this is a white, male, heteronormative political power that is in place here in Brazil, but it has permeated to all levels of society, and that's why we need to keep working and sharing people's personal stories. I really like what our previous speaker said. They said that stories make a larger impact, a greater impact than statistics. And I'm talking about this 17-year-old person who was killed this week on a purely racist basis, let's say. And so we have these protests for cannabis, and we have this movement for March the 8th. We want to make sure that people know that racism kills and the war on drugs also kills. So during this protest, we have a minute of silence for all of the victims of the war on drugs to remember people who have been killed and to remember the pain that this policy causes. And we need to make this pain tangible for our whole Brazilian society. And finally, I want to talk about the 8th of March, which I believe was their greatest achievement, where over the last few years, after working very hard on it, we have been able to speak out about anti-prohibitionism, and in feminist spaces we are now accepted, respected. We have gotten rid of the stigma. Before, we were told that we could not be there, but now people acknowledge us, they accept us, and they welcome our movement into their own. So that was it for my presentation. Thank you very much, and I am willing to answer any questions that you might have or to further discuss any of these topics.
Gracias, Priscila. Pues si os parece, dejamos las preguntas para el final. We can wait for the questions. I will do my intervention in English. I'm so grateful to share with these amazing and strong women. You are amazing, and to be part of the same movement of women fighting back against the war on drugs. Give me a sec. First of all, I want to begin saying how privileged I am and how lucky I am, because I come from a place where we don't have fentanyl, we don't have weapons, drug possession, drug use, sex work is stigmatized and criminalized, but it's not illegal. Anyway, we have other ways to make sure that people who use drugs go to jail, for sure. But Catalonia, that is a little bit different of Spain, was really a pioneering in Europe about harm reduction services. We have consumption rooms, we have needle exchange program, we have methadone programs around. Still, women who use drugs never arrive to these places, or they don't adhere to these places. And before to go there, I want to remark that the stigma against women who use drugs and the war on drugs against women began really earlier than for men. The Inquisition already was punishing women who use plants, the same plants that now are in the base of the modern pharmacology. And they used to burn them, like they casualties, they were like a strong women, they were alone. Normally they were powerful and they used plants as a way to cure or to poison. It depends of the circumstances. And I want to remember them because it's because that our program, I am Aura from Metzineras. Our program take the name of the Metzineras. Metzineras were the women in Catalonia that use plants as a poison or as a remedy. It depends of the circumstances, and they were banned by the Inquisition. And for sure, we thought that we think that stigma is the most the biggest barrier and the one of the stronger violence that we have to survive. This stigma that was built in the Inquisition in the Middle Ages for the women, not for men, but just for the women, make us criminals and make us eroticize us, but never give us the opportunity to be ourselves and depend on the accused. And for sure, we use drugs. We make drugs, we sell drugs, we use drugs, and normally we don't have a lot of problems related with the drug use. And when we have problems related with the drug use, normally it's not because the drug use, but because all that is surrounding drug use, as we could see in the histories that our friends were sharing before. Like this is the population that we have in Metzineras, we participate in Metzineras. Most of us have drug problems, but all of us survive violence together with a lot of other factors like mental health, migratory experience, imprisonment, racialization, transphobia, etc. Just an example, we use a lot of drugs, not just illegal, but also legal. But especially we survive a lot of traumatic experiences, not just because from our male partners, but also during the childhood, for people that we don't know, because of the structural system, care systems, social care systems, and because the criminalization. And again, we don't arrive or hardly ever enter or adhere to the services, to the service like for drug users, because they are 85% are men, and most of the times they are not safe for us, or they don't take into account our specificities. On the other hand, we cannot adhere to the services for women because they don't accept women who use drugs. When we go there, we find that normally there are a lot of prejudice against us. They use these services as a mechanism of controls sometimes, and sometimes they also reproduce prejudice and stigma and discrimination. And then I was a long time outside of Barcelona. And when I came back, we organized ourselves with a lot of women that I met before from Barcelona to fight against this situation. In 2016, we built the network of women who use drugs. It was the first non-institutionalized experience only for women, based on solidarity, mutual support, and trying to build a safe space, not judgmental. We decided to introduce ourselves in the community, not just as a vulnerable women, because we are not just that. We want to be part of the neighborhood as part of the solution and not the problem. And also not just to the community, but also being part of other social movements that normally don't take care of us. Not just organizing with them, but also leading some of the actions that we wanted to be part. For sure, the first step was just to be realistic, pragmatic, really flexible, and showing to the women that we were not going anywhere. and giving all the guarantee that we thought there was confidential, anonymous, and just spending a lot of time building this trust, no? Because we used to be really chronified in the exclusion. A year later, we built Metzineras. Metzineras is the first environments of shelter for women who try to survive in violences. It's the first integrated harm reduction program only for women and gender non-conforming people in Catalonia, with holistic individualized scopes of immediate access based on harm reduction, intersectional feminism, and human rights perspective, proving or holding community strategies that prove that are relevant, pragmatic, cost-effective, with each woman is a protagonist. We have a lot of different, right now, 2 years later, we are around 280 women, like different ages, different backgrounds, but as you saw in the data before, like most of our friends and participants are homeless. 50% of them are struggling with mental health issues. Like, we are really, really heterogeneous. A lot of them has migratory experience. What we tried to put together was to do something like refreshing, like something that was nice for us, build something new where we can have, like, of course, our basic needs covered, but also fun, where we can build self-defense, solidarity, mutual support, and educate ourselves to enhance technical proficiency and improve our political incidents. Also, we wanted to be building a place where we could have, like, work opportunities that other parts of the society couldn't give us. And before to continue, I want to share with you one of the videos just to see what is the ambient that we are trying to create. Then what we are trying also to do, or we are doing that always from this intersectional feminist perspective, really person-centered, founded by the freedom of redefinition, autonomy, empowerment, and improvement of the well-being of each woman. Each woman decide what is her choice and her path to be better in her life. We try to reduce barriers, like she's our doctor, Alejandra, who, as you see, is trying to give the attention and the care where the women feel more comfortable. We have a lot of participatory spaces just to make sure that all the voices of women are heard and have a place, and that we build the place together with all the knowledge that each one can bring. And also we do a lot of activism. We love the streets, and we love the streets not just on the data for to remember people who use drugs and the war on drugs, but also on the feminism movement, just to remember that women are heterogeneous, and we need to build a movement that gives place for everybody. And also to the other social movements that sometimes fall in the prohibitionism, in prohibitionist perspective. I want to share this other video, and before to leave, that this way to act, I want to remember that we have our drop-in center where we have like consumption room, we have also doctor, we have social worker, and we have a lot of activities. But also we have a lot of activities outside, and this video comes from the impact of our activities at the community and in the neighborhood. And I want to show you the result that we are having just after 2 years of being there and being able to share experiences with all the community.
Somos consumidoras, pero aunque seamos consumidoras no dejamos de ser personas. Nos podemos relacionar, podemos trabajar, podemos tener hijos, podemos tener amantes, podemos tener maridos, podemos poner en una casa, puedo fregar platos y puedo tomarme droga.
Hola, ¿os puedo hacer una pregunta, por favor? ¿Cómo es el trato para la gente que consume droga, la percepción que tenéis ahora? Y la que teníais anteriormente, claro.
Ha sido radicalmente diferente, sí, de alguien que no conocíamos de nada hasta saber los nombres, ¿no?
Reconocernos, de bromear, ser vecinas también, ¿no? Compartir relajadamente un espacio que no nos imaginábamos antes.
Hola Carmen, ¿cómo ha cambiado la opinión de las vecinas desde que se hacen proyectos en conjunto con vecineras?
Yo creo que es muy positivo. Ahora he tenido la oportunidad de poder estar más cerca de vosotras y aún más veo que los resultados son maravillosos, ¿no? Este confinamiento ha sido muy potente para ver cómo funcionáis y cómo colaboráis entre vosotras y cómo colaboran las vecinas con vosotras, y creo que ha sido maravilloso, ¿no? Entonces, más no puedo decir, estoy encantada con vosotras.
Nosotras estamos encantadas con la mano que tiene Carmen para cocinar, que nos ha aportado ricas comidas y ricos postres. Gracias, Carmen.
¿Cómo ha sido la llegada de Vecineras al barrio con su trabajo comunitario?
Pues mira, yo al principio no sabía muy bien, no lo conocía, cuál era el trabajo que hacían, pero yo creo que es fundamental para las mujeres que usan drogas tener un sitio donde se les acoja, se les cuide, se les mime, la pueda ver el médico. Mesinera ha hecho visible que la gente que usa drogas son gente tan normal como cualquiera, con un problema como cualquiera tiene el suyo. Y que bueno, que lo menos que podemos hacer es apoyarla y darle visibilidad. Yo ahora no veo una drogadicta, veo a Susana, a todas por su nombre, porque las conocemos. Y bueno, a mí me parece que eso ya es un gran cambio.
Gracias por responder.
Dice así, supe construir un lugar donde vivir, así que nadie me va a convencer de que me tengo que ir. No me voy a ir, esta es mi casa. Ven y pasa, miremos desde la terraza. Cuando te miro todo se me pasa. No hay nada contra la fuerza de nuestra raza. Yo te convido si te falta, a mí me sobra mucha grasa.
Norten, ¿qué opinas sobre Metxerelas?
Pues que sois un grupo muy alegre, que hacéis cosas muy interesantes, muy buenas para el barrio, para el mundo. Para mí lo importante es que las personas consumidoras o no en general sean dueñas de su cuerpo, de su vida y sobre todo que tengan salud.
¿Y cómo cambia el barrio desde que Metxerelas aparece por aquí, por el Ágora?
Cuando entra un colectivo como Metxineras en estos espacios, entramos en contacto personas que igual de otra manera es más difícil. Porque hay prejuicio, porque tenemos miedo, porque no conocemos al otro o a la otra. Y entonces cuesta mucho relacionarte. Y este espacio es fantástico para que nos conozcamos, para que haya esa mirada de ida y de vuelta. Y es fantástico.
Señores y señoras, para mayores de 18 años, rico, rico, fácil, fácil, para toda la familia. Rico vecinaje, Noa al micro.
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo está todo, guapa? ¡Ay, no! Soy Luana Monteiro, soy reportera de Mecinera. Estamos aquí en el barrio de Raval para ver cómo los vecinos aceptan la entrada a un nuevo grupo llamado Mecineras.
Me parece un espacio súper bonito y súper necesario en el barrio, porque es una realidad que existe. Son situaciones que te podrían pasar a ti.
¿Qué te gustó más de todo?
Hostia, la energía que hay, el buen rollismo, la sanidad que hay entre vosotras, la sororidad que hay entre vosotras y cómo os cuidáis y cómo os tenéis presentes, teniendo en cuenta que seguramente hay momentos que no habéis estado del todo bien, pero oye.
Nos hemos sentido súper cómodas aquí haciendo un evento con vosotras y haciendo un montón de cosas, que es una forma también de interseccionar muchas luchas, ¿no? Contra la transfobia, contra anticapitalista, antifeminista, contra el estigma de las drogas y claro, que al final sí, estamos casi en la misma lucha.
En el momento que nosotros entramos aquí, había un poco de estigma. Se consumían drogas, si no consumían drogas, ¿qué íbamos a hacer? Cosas así, ¿no?
Sí, bueno, porque de hecho así de primeras a la gente es algo que le tira para atrás. Asocia el consumo de drogas con mala gente. No es así, ¿no? Ya lo demostráis vosotras. Vuestra presencia aquí pues ha hecho que mucha gente pues vea el consumo de drogas de otra manera.
Yo creo que esto tienen que ser ensayos para una futura sociedad realmente libre, donde establezcamos un tipo de relaciones humanas, solidarias, libres, de mucho respeto de todos los unos con los otros y las otras, y de saber arrimar el hombro cuando cualquiera lo necesite.
No se olviden, beber también es droga, fumar también es droga, somos todos iguales y todos vamos a morir igual, ¿vale? No se olviden.
Que nadie quede afuera, debería ser un decreto. Le saco la careta a este gobierno y su secreto. No quiero más policía. De paso, somos odiados. Me paso, termino borracha. Tengo buena suerte y mala racha. De paso, somos odiados.
And before ending, I just want to remember that the first time that we heard about the word narcofeminism was from our friends of Eurasian Harm Reduction Network or Association, sorry, and Ola especially, who teaches or were in February of 2018. We had a meeting in Barcelona with 30 women or 40 women from around the world, but especially from East Europe and Central Asia. Also with our friends from international network of women who use drugs. And we decided to write this Barcelona Declaration that we invite you to sign it, to read it. You can find it in the Eurasian Harm Reduction Association page, and totally invite inviting you to be part of this amazing movement. We also share a Slack channel for the narco-feminism movement. And yeah, just that. Open to your questions now. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's look at the Q&A. Aura, would you be available to translate some of the Spanish questions?
Okay, I can try.
All right. So we've got 3 questions open currently. Francisco Javier Lopez Lozada said the history of women who have used drugs voluntarily or involuntarily is it is very important to know which strategies are more effective for prevention. Congratulations and hugs from Mexico. From Francisco Lopez Coruna, Salud y Desarrollo AC. Yeah, no, thank you. And I think prevention strategies are incredibly important, but I think that one of the reasons it's also important for us to have culture projects is that it allows us a break from constantly strategizing about prevention strategies and actually gives us more insight into these prevention strategies by allowing us to reflect more on our lives and be able to stop and do that sort of meditative reflection. Does anybody else have any comments on this comment? So the next question is from Loiso Lindani.
Okay.
What are some of the myths and stigma on women who use drugs, and how do you debunk them? How are the women you support or are part of your movement different from other narcotics users? How do I know that I need help as a drug user? What is good or bad? So one thing that we talk a lot about at Narco-Feminism Story Share and at Urban Survivors Union in general is that unfortunately the harm reduction model has been very much based on a white male drug user narrative. And I mean, a lot of public health models, unfortunately, are based on white male narratives. So we're not unique in that, but it is our mission to attempt to create new narratives and thus create new strategies that are culturally and geographically specific, as well as structurally specific for women and non-men, for people of color, for queer and trans people, because our drug user narratives are very different. And sharing those narratives and actually writing them down is the first step. Myths and stigma on women who use drugs and how you debunk them, I think that's, I will turn that question over to Jess in a second, because I think that's basically been the thrust of our entire presentation here, and we could go on about that question forever. As to how you know that you need help as a drug user and what is good or bad, I don't think any of us can answer that question. I think only you can answer that question for yourself as to whether you need help or what sort of help or resources you need. And none of us can define what is good or bad for you. Jess, would you like to take the rest of the question?
Sure, and I'm just going to comment a little bit. I said it wouldn't be popular. I started commenting, but I was on mute. When it comes to prevention, I do believe prevention is important, but personally, my own stance is that we have demonized drugs so badly. I don't feel like we need prevention. I think we need to teach people about drugs and about the myths surrounding drug use. Only 10% of drug users are in chaotic drug use, and we don't ever hear that. So I like to point that out. I think so many of us. I've been shouted at when I'm speaking on stage about what about prevention, and I'm like, are you hearing any of the words that are coming out of my mouth? Again, not to say prevention is not good, but we have to go about it in a completely different way. The war on drugs has just taught us that prevention is the only answer to drug use. As far as myths and stigma, like Katie said, as women, we are taught that you cannot be a drug user and be a mother. You cannot go to school. You cannot live a productive life. And the only way to truly fight that stigma and those myths is to speak out about drug use. There are so many of us. I mean, I'm outed as a drug user and I'm okay with that, but I speak for so many women who can't speak for their own drug use. I think I remember when Louise and I first did one of, I think the second presentation, there were so many professionals in the audience that came up to us one after another. They'd kind of wait until another woman went away and say, like, I'm a drug user. Like, thank you for speaking for me because I can't. And they were in tears. And it really reinforced in us why we need to break down the myths and stereotypes. Quite often after I give a presentation, I'm approached by 10 folds of people that are telling me you can't be a drug user, you're on stage speaking, and that in itself is destroying the myth that a person who uses drugs doesn't have agency to speak. It angers me so much, but I understand it's especially here in the United States, the war on drugs has taught society that women specifically who use drugs, not only do we not have the agency to speak, we don't have the right to speak about our drug use. And asking the question about, how do you know? I get asked this quite often because I speak so openly about being an injection drug user. When your life gets to the point of chaoticness that you can't handle drug use, you can't do what you love best. When drugs become something that are so encompassing and taking over your world, that's when you need help. What kind of help that you need can only be defined by you and someone you trust, whether it be somebody working in harm reduction, whether it be 12-step. One of the best comments ever given to me by one of my mentors was harm reduction for him is never using his drug of choice. And, and I stick by that because that's one of my drugs of choice, that I just know harm reduction for me is not going near that drug. So, the best advice I could give if you're asking personally for yourself, I don't know if that's what the question was asking, but is reach out to somebody that understands drug use, that isn't going to shame you or demonize you, and who will help you find that path, whether it be abstinence-based, whether it be controlled use. There is a path out there, and don't always believe that path has to be abstinence-based recovery, because that could kill you.
I just wanted to note that I am just so naively drug user positive that I assumed that the reference to prevention was prevention of HIV or Hep C or overdose or other bad outcomes, not prevention of drug use itself. Yes, we need to re-embrace drug use. I want to all the participants to speak and answer questions, but I also know that we only have a little bit of time left. So I was wondering if you could translate some of the Spanish questions, particularly from Stacy Velasquez, who has some of her questions have already been answered in text, but I believe one of the other Spanish question that's in the answered column is for our contact information.
Okay, I will do my best because I am a terrible translator. But hola, Stacy Velasquez from Guatemala, of Trans Harm RN, Red Flag Trans, to the people who use drugs. For the people who use drugs, is necessary a strategy of harm reduction, not just to quit the use of drugs, because it would be the same that a person that don't use drugs had to be all the time using drugs. It's just a comment, it's not a question.
I think Stacy also mentioned in the comments that a factor for the sex workers in her area is not just drug use, but also extreme poverty. And I wanted to say that I'm very sorry that in this session, we didn't get to the narco-feminism story share stories about our lives as low-income sex workers, or about us being in coercive situations within the sex trade. But I'm very excited about those stories, about the stories of drug-using sex workers, about stories about us navigating poverty, although poverty in a U.S. context is, of course, very different. And also stories that are going to be told about how we are navigating this disaster to our industry that is COVID-19 and how sex workers globally are doing mutual aid for each other. I can't say more than a sentence about that right now, but I'm excited to explore that not just through policy work and community work, but through stories. I believe that there is a question from Veronica Russo from Argentina in here.
It is a comment also, like, hi Veronica, I miss you so much. She's from the activist network of people who use drugs. I'm from the Latin American network of people who use drugs. And she's saying that she wants to remember that not all the drug users are people that are sick, that the visibility give the drug users access to health, and it is necessary, but that the real enemy is the criminalization, that the prevention is this visibility, and the prevention is also communicating good practices and provide with tools to the people who use drugs to be able to use in a responsible way. Sorry, because
Yeah.
my words.
There's one person in the chat asking how policy can be influenced now in the COVID-19 pandemic. I fear that's for another session, and I don't believe we can answer it within 4 minutes. I was wondering if, Priscilla, if you had something to add to the, in reference to some of these questions. So we have about 4 minutes left, so for translation also. If you would like to.
Yes, of course. Well, I would like to agree with Veronica Russo from Argentina and her comment, because I don't believe drug users should be considered sick. I believe the system is sick. I believe the system is lethal. And there's some data from a survey carried out in Brazil which shows that 80% of people that use crack on the streets want to take part in some sort of program. They understand the need to take care of themselves, and they sometimes begin their own harm reduction programs by themselves because they understand the need to drink water, to start doing something, but stigma and discrimination don't allow people to have access to those spaces, because when they get there, moral judgment is so strong that, well, religion in this case in Brazil, there are these so-called therapeutic communities which want to basically send people away and lock them away. And so, of course, programs are against this, because this is not about a moral need that we have. Our need is to break down this system. And I'm referring to the same survey that shows that most women who overuse drugs or are addicted to drugs were suffering domestic violence or sexual violence throughout their lives, or maybe their children were also victims of violence. And it turns out that drugs, as many of you said in your stories, were a place where they could find some relief. Drugs were a way out and escape. Sometimes drugs help us deal with the amount of pain that we need to go through, but it doesn't mean that prevention is not useful. I believe that we need to speak the truth without resorting to stigmatization and without telling people that they need to do things our way. We need everyone to build this horizontally, because if we allow ourselves to do that, we can find many different alternatives.
Thank you so very much. We are currently frantically typing our contact information in the chat again. Thank you so much for this time and for allowing us to share these vital culture projects that we are conducting as drug-using women and non-men. Yeah, does anybody else have any parting words?
No, thank you for allowing us to share our stories and hearing Ara and Priscilla. I know Ara, Priscilla, it was wonderful to hear you. I was like, I'm packing my bags and going to Brazil. Like, I want to be there. I think it's just powerful that we as women are heard, and that we start destroying the damage that has been done by criminalization and prohibition. Like others have said, that is the real enemy here, not drugs, not drug use.
Yeah, Ara, we missed you, and Priscilla, it was so nice to finally meet you in this context.
I miss you so much, and I think that the next step when all these things pass and we can travel again is just to meet in some nice place all together and be able to build this new reality in our own terms, and not this new reality that is like with mass and silence and fear, and just to be so powerful together again.
Yes, definitely.
In respect for all of your time, we will end the session now, but thank you so much. In solidarity with all of you, be well.